Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Linodisplay, Linode, and Kensington. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, of course, is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. Hi. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We're heading into the holiday season. It's kind of exciting, I don't know. I feel like I'm both excited and enjoying it, but I'm also starting to feel busy, which, that kind of comes with the territory.
I'm already exhausted.
Personally. Good for you. You've been playing too much Pokemon. That's your problem.
That is true, but also it's the whole shopping and buying gifts and planning social events. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And we have a bunch of things to organize for Mac Stories, and it's also tax season in Italy, so there's that on top of everything else. It's busy, man. I'm super excited though about what we're planning for the website.
Yeah, I am too.
And the club. You may have seen on Friday we announced in the Club Mac Stories newsletter, Mac Stories Weekly, we announced that as part of our Mac Stories Selects awards that we're doing for the second time this year. This time we're going to have a Reader's Choice Award, and that means that Club Mac Stories members will be able to vote their iOS or iPadOS overall best app of the year, so their favorite app for iPhone and iPad of 2019, regardless of its release date. So it's the overall best app according to our readers, and that's new this year. So if you're a Club Mac Stories member, check out issue 203, that's 203 of Mac Stories Weekly, and at the very top you will find the section where all the details are explained and where there's a link that will take you to a form, and in the form you can write the name of the app that is your favorite of the year. It can be any app. You can write anything you want, and our system will take care. Well, by system, I mean me and John. We will take care of counting and sorting the votes. So that's one of the new things we're planning, but we're doing a lot more for Mac Stories Selects. I really do believe that it's important to always, try something else and improve upon what you did last year. Never stop, never rest on a system. You can apply a system that works, but it's always better to innovate and to try something else and optimize. That's the spirit of Mac Stories, and we're sort of doing that with Selects this year. So those are coming. Look for those in I don't want to give an exact date, but about a couple of weeks time before the holidays, they will be on the website.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, last year was our first year and it was a lot of fun. And of course, being our first year, we learned a lot, and we thought of a bunch of other things we want to do this year that are just a little bit different. And if you want to vote and you're not a Club Mac Stories member, of course, you can go to club.macstories.net to sign up, and you can give it as a gift. There's actually a post from last week on Mac Stories that I wrote that I'll put a link in the show notes, because there are special links for giving Club Mac Stories as a gift. That's enough promotion of Mac Stories, I think, for one episode, Federico.
Well, it's never enough, but yes, we do have an actual episode to talk about, a few topics to discuss.
We do. And, it's the end of the year, and we got a lot of things this year when we went to WWDC from Apple in terms of its system apps. And so there's a lot, having just passed Thanksgiving in the US, there's a lot to be thankful for. But, we're never totally satisfied. There's always something more that we can wish for and want. So we thought today we would go through our wishes for 2020. What would we like to see Apple do with the system apps, both on iOS and iPadOS, but also on the Mac?
What would you like to see, John?
Well, I think since I have spent so much time this year talking about and writing about Catalyst, I'm going to start with that because, I was a little disappointed with some of the stuff we saw this year. You can actually, as you listen to this, yesterday, the Mac Powers users will have just published an episode where I talked about Catalyst for about an hour and a half with Stephen and David Sparks. So that's available. But one of the things that I want to see with Catalyst is I want to see Apple dig in and convert some more of their apps to Catalyst, because I think we've gotten one really good example, I think, which is podcasts. And I think Find My is pretty good too. And then we've got the 4 old ones, which I'll get to in a second. But I'd like to see Apple do something to encourage the use of Catalyst by third-party developers. And good way to do that is to use it themselves. And I think especially with apps like Messages, Maps, Notes, and Calendar, those are all apps that are not like really power user complex apps. They tend to be a little simpler. They also happen to have an analog on iOS. And I think that makes them really good candidates to be made Catalyst apps so that they can be developed in tandem going forward, and that one version doesn't get ahead of the other version like we've seen sometimes in the past.
That's a great pick, actually. Yeah, I agree. I don't wanna reuse the actual same round robin format that we so famously
we didn't invent.
Connected.
I was going to say we did not invent it here, although we have stolen it a couple of times.
Yes, credit where is due, but it's really, and I also think the round robin format makes more sense when you have 3 people, not 2 people, because then it's just 2 people talking to each other.
Right.
Whereas the round robin has an actual order to respect. Obviously, I don't have a lot of Mac related thoughts. I do agree on the Catalyst sentiment. I do feel like I want to see more. I feel like I spent $40 on a Catalyst app a while back, and then I never used it because it didn't really behave the way that I wanted it to.
Right.
I want to see more, and I hope that it's not the kind of experiment that Apple does once, and that's about it. So
yeah,
I hope to see movement on that front at WWDC 2020.
Yeah, I think it's going to take some additional work by Apple, but I have started to see a lot of those initial Catalyst apps that came out with Catalina improve since then, because there were, everything was kind of rushed out the door a little bit in September, October, and some of the apps were a little rough around the edges, and I've seen a lot of improvements as well as some new apps come out. So I'm still optimistic that things will work out. I do think though that there's an impression out there that Apple's eye is not on this ball because there's not a lot of documentation. Those original 4 apps, Notes, Voice Memos, News, and Stocks, are all still in the same state we got them in 2018. They've really not changed in any meaningful way. And, it's time for Apple, I think, especially, it'd be great if they did this before we got to WWDC. I mean, Apple's shown that they're willing to do that in some circumstances, like with ARKit, right? Why not create additional features for Catalyst, get the documentation in place, and start rolling that stuff out early in 2020? And so that when we get to WWDC in June, Apple will have a more compelling story to tell, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wanted to talk about some of the iOS system apps.
Okay.
I was looking at my list, and there's basically, I want to see improvements and feature updates, but there's also like a brand new app that doesn't exist that I would like to see. But let me start with the improvements, and I want to start, this is sort of a following up to what I discussed on the latest episode of Connected, improvements to Safari for iPhone. We had a really good discussion, I think, with Mike and Steven about Mike's experience in switching from Google Chrome for iOS to Safari for iOS and iPadOS. Mm-hmm. And I feel like my problems essentially boil down to Safari for iPhone having an interface that was okay a few years ago, but then now I feel like needs to be updated, needs to be rejuvenated a little. Specifically, I feel like the tab view in portrait mode on the iPhone really leaves a lot to be desired. And especially if you're the type of person who opens a lot of tabs every day, it's a suboptimal experience to navigate with the carousel view on iPhone. I would like to see a grid view like on iPad, or like when you rotate your iPhone to landscape mode. I would like to see a similar view in portrait as well. And I would like to have gestures for managing tabs that are consistent with the iPad. The iPad In iPadOS 13 with Safari for iPadOS, you get a lot of new commands in terms of holding down on a tab and getting these new options in a context menu. There's options to sort your tabs, to close tabs. It's really well done, and all of these features are available on the iPhone, but only in landscape mode.
Right.
And I never use my iPhone in landscape mode, so I would like to see a better Safari experience in portrait on iPhone with gestures that are consistent with the iPadOS behavior. And I also think reading list, which, I mean, we talked about this. I had to switch from reading list to reader's own read later mode. I think it's good enough, but it hasn't been touched by Apple in a few years. Now, ideally, reading lists, like I would love to see like a reading list app by Apple that incorporates your Safari reading list with stories that you've saved from Apple News. I don't think this is ever gonna happen because it's a very niche type of feature request.
Right.
But at the very least, I would love to see Apple actually do some work on reading lists inside Safari as a Safari feature. Literally anything could be okay at this point, from better search to sorting to folders. Like, pick whatever is the lowest hanging fruit, Apple, and just, show us that you're still working on Safari reading lists and it wasn't just an experiment from an intern 7 years ago.
Yeah, I want to reinforce something that Mike said during that episode too, which is I'm right there with him on the Chrome in Safari, that I don't like the way it disappears. And it's really that bottom toolbar more than anything that drives me a little bit crazy. And I think the reason that it bothers me, maybe more than you, is that there's a lot of times when I'll be looking through my RSS reader, which is Reader, on my Mac, and I'll see a story that I want to save for the newsletter that week. And I'll open it up in Safari, but because we don't have shortcuts on the Mac, which is also one of my wishes, I open up my phone and use handoff to open it up in Safari on my phone. And, as a result, I use that share button in Safari on my phone all the time. And if I'm scrolling through that article, kind of looking at it to just double check and make sure it's something I want to link, I don't have the toolbar at the bottom. And I think maybe this is the kind of feature that I get that this would be, you'd want this on a really small phone. And if Apple is doing another small phone, it may make sense to have it there. But on these bigger size classes like, the iPhone 11 Pro Max, why do we really, I think I've got plenty of real estate for reading on my phone without having that toolbar disappear. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Luna Display. Luna Display is the only hardware solution that turns your iPad or Mac into a wireless display. Luna sets up in just seconds and works over Wi-Fi or a USB cable for those times when you don't have a Wi-Fi network available. And unlike Sidecar's limited 10-meter range, Luna works wherever your Wi-Fi can reach. It also works in 3 different modes. There's Mac to iPad mode, Mac to Mac, and headless mode. With Luna's newly launched Mac to Mac mode, you can take a secondary Mac and make it the second screen for your primary Mac. I'm doing exactly that with an older MacBook Pro. It's now the second screen for my Mac Mini that I use day in and day out for my Mac Stories work. And because Luna works with Mac OS 10.8 and later, you can use it with a bunch of different Macs you might have. There's also headless mode, which is something I use with a Plex server. I have a older Mac Mini that serves as a Plex server, and by using a Luna Display, I can use my iPad anywhere in my home to manage that machine. Of course, there's also Mac to iPad mode, where Luna Display turns your iPad into a complete extension of your Mac with full support for external keyboards, Apple Pencil, and touch interactions. It literally turns your Mac into a touchscreen device. Luna runs a proprietary video technology called Liquid, which was originally engineered and designed to meet the workflow demands of professional digital artists, which means that it produces a stunning image and virtually zero lag. App Stories listeners can get an exclusive 15% off on a Luna Display. Just visit lunadisplay.com and enter the promo code STORIES at checkout. Again, that URL is lunadisplay.com, and the promo code is STORIES at checkout to get 15% off. Our thanks to Lunar Display for their support of App Stories.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like the fact that the toolbar disappears is not ideal. I guess I'm very used at this point to tapping on the toolbar to show the UI around the web page again.
Right.
I do see. Here's my problem with this idea. I do like the fact that when I'm reading something, the UI disappears around the web page, and that it's super minimal. You only get the minimized address bar at the top of Safari.
Yeah, that part I don't mind.
I do love the effect. I also understand why it would be more convenient if you're doing like heavy duty. You're managing like dozens of open tabs, and you need to share links, as we do, for example, with Shortcuts or with Trello or whatever. Like, it would be more convenient to always have the share button available. And this is one of my like bigger ideas. I know, again, it's never going to happen. Used to be, and it still is really an option on the Mac. I really want to be able to customize my toolbars. Like, I want to be able to customize, like, do I want to make this toolbar persistent or not? How many icons do I want to show in this toolbar? Should the icons be displayed as icon only or icon and text label? Like, all these features that you have on macOS, I would actually don't mind on iPadOS as well. Like, give me more freedom, Apple. Let me choose the way that I feel like, and maybe this is a bigger topic. Maybe it should be an episode. Like, I feel like, to some extent, the era of the designer-made interface it's not necessarily coming to an end, but I feel like more and more people just want freedom and people just want customization. And I do get it, like the appeal of Apple's products has long been the opinion behind the product, the fact that it's designed by someone to look a certain way. But also, when it comes to software, software needs to be flexible. Software needs to adapt to all kinds of people. Like, you can make the argument that the iPhone needs to have an opinionated design because it's a physical product. It's an object that you buy, and the object you buy stays the same way as long as you have it. Like, it doesn't change its shape or form. But does software really need to be this much opinionated, like this much set in stone by a designer or a team of designers? Or wouldn't it be better if software, and in this case iOS, was, built around some firm and common principles, but also flexible enough to accommodate, John likes to share links day in and day out. Federico likes to share links and run shortcuts and have icon labels. Like, this idea that no, the designer decides and what software should look like for you, and that's it. You have no control. I'm not arguing for Android, by the way. I don't want to switch to Android and have unlimited freedom, just a tiny amount of freedom. That's all I request.
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from, and I feel the same way. I think what you're really articulating is more a historical accident, maybe you call it, in that, the iPhone's not been around nearly as long as the Mac. And I think especially in those early days when the iPhone was really just a very new thing, it was a new way to compute. People needed that kind of consistency to be able to understand and learn how to use it. But we're at a point now where the phone in your pocket is replacing your computer in a lot of circumstances, and why shouldn't it be just as flexible as the one that sits on your desk? I'm completely there with you on that. In terms of that UI, I get that you are used to tapping at the top in order to make the toolbar go away, and that's fine. But again, on a bigger phone, that's also a bit of a reach. So what I end up doing most often is just kind of scrolling back the other direction just a little bit to make the UI appear, which is fine, except then you kind of lose where you are in the document.
So the app that doesn't exist, but that I would really like to see, is a dedicated keychain app for iOS, iPadOS, and maybe even, the Mac has it, but like a new keychain app for the Mac. And specifically what I would like to see is Apple take what they've done with Safari, but really with the passwords and accounts feature of settings, and make it a standalone app, a keychain app that is an all-in-one solution to manage your accounts, your passwords, and why not maybe even go beyond that and offer support for one-time authentication codes, like the 6-digit codes that you can create in apps like Google Authenticator or 1Password. And maybe it could be like an even broader solution to manage your identities, to manage signing with Apple, to like an all-in-one, fully featured keychain app that is modernized for the current era of two-factor authentication and new sign-in options and secure passwords and all of that. It could have integration with Safari, as always, with Safari View Controller and with all kinds of system apps that already integrate with password autofill. It could also expand to the Mac, where there's a system keychain, but it was really designed decades ago, and as far as passwords are concerned, it doesn't support the same secure password creation features that are available on iOS and iPadOS.
Right.
It's interesting because every year, for the past several years, Apple has put in the work to expand password autofill in Safari and eventually the passwords and accounts feature of settings, but it's always remained that just a feature of a bigger app, either Safari or settings or the system keyboard. And I really feel like it can be a little unintuitive for people to say. And there's this weird contrast, I think, between saying the system takes care of everything for you. You don't need to think about your passwords. You don't need to think about your usernames and accounts. But then if you want to find them, you got to navigate like 3 levels
Right.
deep into settings. Like
Right.
you make it super intuitive for me to sign up for a website. And then when I want to copy a password,
Like,
I
where do you
got to
go?
read like, where do I go? And so it should really become easier. And I mean, Apple is even adding support for physical security keys based on USB-C and Lightning in
Right.
iOS and iPadOS 13.3, which is currently in beta. So they're continuing their work on expanding security and privacy and authentication on modern devices. There should really be a standalone app for all of this because going into settings is not ideal.
Yeah, there really should be. And the thing with settings now is there is so much in there. I forget all the time where things are. Are my passwords part of iCloud, or are they part of Safari, or are they in some other third location? That's a little hard to keep track of sometimes. And I would actually take your standalone app idea and I would throw in there things like family sharing and subscriptions, because that would give people a reason to go there. And I could see an app that had kind of the same features that you would get with 1Password for families, where there might be someone who's the administrator of a family set of passwords and subscriptions, because that's effectively what family sharing is. There's an organizer, and then there are family members on that account, and then just make passwords and good password practices part of that for an entire household.
Yeah, I agree. I've always wished for that kind of like family dashboard. Means again, instead of having to go into settings,
Right.
And yeah. I really want Apple to make more apps. Is what I'm saying. Enough with the settings. We want apps, man. We want actual user interfaces. But yeah, we'll see. What's one of your other app related wishes, John? You did mention just in passing.
Yes.
Shortcuts for Mac. Like, is that something you want?
I do. And Steve Troughton-Smith has shown that it's possible and that most of the code is already in there because, as you know, it's in the Home app because you can create those automations in the automation tab there. I would like to have it there. I find, I don't find Automator or AppleScript easy to use. And when I use Automator, which is probably the easier of the two, I always find myself in a situation where very quickly I end up having to write some kind of script. And I think while you can do that in shortcuts, you can do an awful lot more with shortcuts on iOS right out of the box without having to get into actually writing, I don't know, whatever it happens to be, JavaScript or maybe Python scripts or whatever. You don't have to do that. And so I'd love to see that come to the Mac. I'd also like to see, and I'm going to switch gears out of the Mac for just a second, because you were mentioning the passwords app, I'd really like to see some more pro apps come to the iPad from Apple. I'd like to see Xcode. We've talked about that now for I don't know how many years, Federico. I mean, it seems like it's been
a while.
It's been a really long time. And, I kind of thought we were headed in that direction when Playgrounds came out, because if anyone's ever used Playgrounds on the iPad, there's a really interesting and unique keyboard that's in that app that feels like the beginnings of a way to create code on the iPad. And I'd love to see that app come to the iPad. I'd also like to see things like Logic and Final Cut Pro on the iPad. It doesn't have to be necessarily every last feature that you find on the Mac, but something that actually lets you create content and edit audio and video and that sort of thing on a portable device, because the iPad Pro is absolutely capable of handling that sort of thing, as we've seen from apps from third parties like Ferrite and LumaFusion.
Yeah. Would you consider actually doing app stories on an iPad with those kinds of pro apps?
I think I would. Yeah. I hesitate only a little bit because I have invested so much time in Logic on the Mac that it would be hard for me right now to switch to Ferrite, though I could. I think, though, if Apple put together Logic on the iPad with a similar workflow that you would use in Logic on the Mac, that transition would be a little easier, and I'd be more willing to give it a try, because I really would like more of a complete option to always leave my Mac at home if I want to. I mean, I don't have a problem taking it places, but there's certain tasks that I really either have to or prefer to do on my Mac, and I'd love to have a little bit more depth of options when it comes to the iPad. So, it's the choice is mine and not dictated by what I have to get done. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you can instantly deploy and manage an SSD server in the Linode cloud. And you can get your server up and running in just seconds with your choice of Linux distro, resources, and node location. It doesn't matter if you're working on your very first server or deploying a complex system. Linode are the folks to go to. They offer the fastest hardware and network with outstanding customer support if you ever need help. And it's super easy to launch a Linode cloud server. Their block storage is available in Newark, Fremont, Dallas, Atlanta, Frankfurt, London, and Singapore, and soon Tokyo too. Version 4 of Linode's RESTful API is out of beta, and it includes an officially supported Python CLI. Right now, Linode is hiring too. So if you want to learn more and check out what they're looking for, just go to linode.com/careers. On top of that, Linode has pricing options to suit everyone's needs. This is one of my favorite things. It's made it very affordable for us to use here at Mac Stories. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for just $5 a month, and they offer high memory plans starting with 16 gigabytes of RAM. And Linode have a special offer just for listeners of App Stories. You can go to linode.com/appstories and use the promo code AppStories2019 to get $20 toward any of Linode's plans. On the 1 gigabyte of RAM plan, that's 4 free months. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, you have nothing to lose. So give Linode a try today. Again, that's linode.com/appstories and the promo code AppStories2019 to learn more, sign up, and make the most of that $20 credit. Our thanks to Linode for their support of the show.
I have a list of improvements that I would like to see in Mail and Reminders, which are two of the Apple apps that I use the most on a daily basis, I think, in Mail. And we probably mentioned some of these before here on the show. In Mail, I would like to see a more obvious integration with the share sheet. Finally, in iOS and iPadOS 13, there is some basic integration between Mail and the share sheet in that you can select the subject of an email message or any text within an email message and share that to the Reminders extension. And the reminder that you create will have a deep link to that email message.
Right.
There will be an icon, a mail icon in the new reminder, and that icon is actually a button that takes you back to that message. I would like to see this integration to be more fleshed out and to actually be available to third parties as well, because this only works for reminders at the moment. Obviously, saved searches in Mail, one of my favorite features of Mail for macOS. I would love to see filtering criteria to create saved searches or smart mailboxes, and that feature could also be rolled into support for rules, which are also another Mac-only feature to automatically process and file incoming email messages. Would this make sense on an iPad Pro? I mean, why not? It's that idea again. Just give me the option, give me the freedom to choose, and then I can do whatever I want. It's called an iPad Pro for a reason, because it's used by professionals, and professionals do get a lot of email.
Right.
Reminders, I also covered most of these requests in my iOS 13 review. I need to be able to attach all kinds of attachments to tasks, not just images or photos. Like, let me attach a PDF, let me attach a zip file or whatever. Right now, you can only attach photos to your reminders in iOS 13. Smart lists, which Apple launched this year, are really not that smart in that you cannot create them yourself. Those are Apple-made lists for like today and scheduled and flagged. But let me create my own smart views. Again, give me search criteria, give me filters, and I will create my own top-level smart list for reminders. Give me more icon choices. When I'm creating a reminders list, I can choose from 60 SF symbols-based glyphs, and Apple has like 1,500 of them. So I'm not saying that Apple should put the entire SF symbol set in reminders, but maybe, more than 60 could do. I don't know, even double that. I mean, easy enough. You already have the icons.
More colors too would be kind of nice.
More colors would be very nice. I would love to see the ability to actually sort reminders within a list by name, or this crazy idea, due date, which is, people organize their tasks with dates. What a concept. The last two probably never going to happen, but I'll mention them anyway. In 13, you have a new type of activation trigger for a reminder. You can be reminded the next time you send a message to somebody. But this trigger only works with the Messages app. And I really use WhatsApp and Slack more than iMessage. So I would love for developers of third-party apps to become available options in terms of the next time I'm talking to somebody in, any of these services, remind me to tell that person something. I really would like to see, maybe it could become part of the SiriKit domain for messaging. It could be part of that framework for developers. And finally, I would love to see in the Today page of reminders, in addition to all my tasks that are due today, also a summary, like an optional summary of my calendar events, so that reminders can become like an all-in-one page of everything that is going on in my life. Apps like Things and OmniFocus, they support this option, which, as the word says, it's optional. You don't have to show events alongside tasks, but if you want, the option's there. And I would love to have like the Today page being a single overview of everything that is going on in a specific day.
Yeah, there's definitely a reason why apps like Agenda are popular, because people want to see their calendar with their tasks. That's the whole point of a whole bunch of different apps. It's funny, as you were talking about, remind me when I message someone, I thought of something that I've experienced this week where I had something I wanted to mention to you. It wasn't really a high priority, and I figured next time I'm texting with you in messages, I'll mention it to you. What the problem is that when I send a message to our group chat with Stephen and Mike, it also reminds me to remind you, and that's not where I would do that. I would only do that if it was just a message between you and me, and that I'd like to kind of tie it not just to a person, but to a particular thread in messages, which would be kind of nice. There are a few things in reminders for Mac that really should be addressed, that there are weird omissions that are available on iOS that aren't on the Mac. For instance, you can't get the large, rich previews that you can get on iOS on the Mac. They're just the tiny little bubbles that don't really give you any context for what what link you've saved or whatever it happens to be. So I'd love to see that improved. The other thing that drives me a little bit crazy is that when you create, if you're in the scheduled view, and I believe this is also true on iOS, when you're in the scheduled view, and if you create, I may scroll down to Friday and add something under Friday. It's just easier that way, and because I'm already in that list, it goes to my default list, which is Mac Stories. But what if it's not? I mean, the problem is that you can't on the Mac, you can't designate using the little info button which list it goes on. You can drag it to the sidebar and drop it in that way, but you can't do it while you're in the compose view, which always struck me as a little bit strange. And I guess the final thing I'd love to see is task assignment instead of shared lists, because you and I have been trying this a little bit with a shared list, and it's okay, but if it's not the same as assigning a task, which you can do, I believe, in like Todoist, where I can say, Federico, please take care of this by Thursday. And it's on your list, and I'll get a notification when you complete it, but it's not also in my list. So now my list has something due on Thursday that's your responsibility, not mine, and I don't really like that. I mean, it works great for things like grocery lists that you might share with somebody, but not so much with tasks where it's one person's responsibility or the others.
Yeah, I agree. It's not an ideal situation to not to have those controls, but also I don't want to use a third-party task manager anymore. So I can.
No, I know.
Those.
Yeah. We're suffering through it. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's not great. Can I raise one more Mac app with you?
Sure thing. You can.
One that is the one I liked the least when I did my Catalina review, and that is the Books app. And the Books app, I get that Books is probably not a high priority on the Mac because maybe you probably don't read a lot of books on your Mac. On the other hand, books aren't just reading a novel. A lot of people will have books in that app that are reference books, whether it's maybe you're a developer and you've got an iOS development book in there and you want to refer to it as your coding. And that app was, they bolted on audiobooks in just kind of the craziest, most haphazard way. It's like a little player that sits down at the bottom of the left-hand sidebar where there just happened to be some room. And the rest of it was left untouched, whereas on iOS, that app got a lot of love. I guess it's now been 2 years ago. And it's a really great experience for reading, and it's just not nearly as good on the Mac. So I'd like to see that app brought up kind of to parity with what you have on iOS.
Yeah, that's a good wish, actually. You didn't have to ask me. I agree with that. My final wish, again, I mentioned all of these issues that I've had with shortcuts before, but I really want to see Apple improve shortcuts in 2020. I feel like the past 2 years have been years of transition because in the first year we saw shortcuts become part of the Apple family, right, from workflow to shortcuts. And then this year in 2019, we saw shortcuts become part of the system as a built-in app with a new editor, a new security model, and some new integrations and a major new feature, which is automation. But I feel like we still need to see, we have seen 2 foundation updates essentially. And I want to see Apple go back to actually ship new actions, new integrations, new power user features. Because we shouldn't forget that for as much as Apple likes to present shortcuts as automation for everyone, and I do agree with that sentiment, and I think it's awesome, it's also undeniable that shortcuts is used and relied upon by thousands, I don't want to say millions, but I want to say hundreds of thousands of professional users for iPhone and iPad. And I feel like we need more integrations. We need stuff like proper files integration to be able to automate any folder, any directory of the Files app with shortcuts. There should be more actions for Apple's own apps. The fact that reminders and notes and music have outdated actions that predate shortcuts in some cases are the same actions that were available in workflow, I think it's an absurd predicament to be in. Now that Shortcuts is an Apple app, all kinds of Apple apps should support modern shortcuts actions that expose all of the functionalities of an app via shortcuts. And more options for users who put together shortcuts that are more than just like 2-action commands. So stuff like allow me to copy and paste actions between shortcuts, allow me to save action presets, which is something that even Ole Zorn with Editorial actually shipped years ago in his programmable text editor. You could save a preset for an action. Allow me to fold actions within the shortcuts editor. So if I have a shortcut that is 200 actions long, let me fold sections of that shortcut and make navigation easier. And there's all kinds of other integrations like more triggers for automation, because why not? Give me more freedom to run automations without my consent, because why not? Give me proper support for quick look previews in Siri. Simon Stovring figured this one out with Scriptable, a third-party app. I don't see why Shortcuts, which is a system built-in Apple-made app, shouldn't have quick look previews when a shortcut is running inside Siri. And then I guess there's just the idea of speeding up the execution of a shortcut. Let me assign a global hotkey, a global keyboard shortcut. I have an iPad Pro with an Apple-made smart keyboard that has keys that I can use for keyboard shortcuts. Let me assign keyboard shortcuts to my shortcuts. Let me run a shortcut from the home screen without actually launching the Shortcuts app. Running from there, running within the icon itself. I could go on. When I run a shortcut from the share sheet, do I really need to see the execution of all the actions? Can't you just run the shortcut in the background for me and show me UI when necessary? So a bunch of things like that. There's a lot of work to be done still on Shortcuts, which, yes, it's now a system app. Yes, a lot of work went into it, but in a lot of ways, it still feels built on top of the limitations that the workflow team ran into. Now they don't have those limitations anymore, but it still feels like we're in that era of like, yeah, when you launch a shortcut from the home screen, it launches the Shortcuts app. But it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
It could just run there. So that sort of mindset of let's make it more powerful, let's make it faster, let's make it easier, and let's integrate everything we can possibly integrate with it, because we have this system, why not use it?
Yeah, I think now that Shortcuts is even more baked into the system itself, that things like you mentioned, where you tap on a shortcut and it opens up the Shortcuts app from the home screen, that those feel more out of place now than they ever have. And I would love to see some of that stuff come to the background. That would be fantastic. I mean, I think what one of the things you're kind of hoping for is a better editor, essentially. And boy, the Xcode could be that, right? Maybe Xcode could help it. You could make your shortcuts in Xcode or build your next iOS app. I don't know. I mean, it's probably not necessary to have something that complex to build shortcuts in, but why not make that an option too? Or, there's the Playgrounds UI already there. Maybe there's some things that could be borrowed from there to make the editor a little more manageable in Shortcuts itself. Yeah, I like all those ideas. Those are great. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Kensington, the people who make universal docking stations that are designed to increase productivity. You can get access to more ports and make your sleek MacBook, Chromebook, or other laptop as powerful as a desktop. It's plug and play with no drivers, so you can enjoy up to dual 4K displays with HDMI and DisplayLink video connectors, plus USB 3.0, USB-C, and Thunderbolt 3 with power delivery available. The Kensington engineering team has 3 decades of experience in high-volume manufacturing of hardware IT products. Plus, rigorous test cycles and quality control mean all their products are tested above industry standards. If you're an IT decision maker looking to find the right docking solution for your organization, check out Kensington's Pro Concierge program and test drive a docking solution today. Visit kensington.com/appstories right now to check out Kensington Docks. Again, that's kensington.com/appstories to learn more. Our thanks to Kensington for their support of App Stories. All right, Federico, I have one last wish that I want to squeeze in before we wrap it up for today, and that is, you know me, I've never been a big fan of the Home app, and I really would like Apple to rethink the design. I think there are a couple of things here that I want to see. First of all, and they're both related to the Home Plus 4 app that was recently updated and we wrote about. The first is that even using kind of the tile UI, Home Plus 4 allows you to tuck away and hide sections of the UI. So it's basically like a folding outline where you can hide the children elements of the outline. I'd love to see something like that come to the Home app on iOS from Apple. Maybe, but I'm a little hesitant to mention that only because I'm still not sure that the Tile UI is the best UI, especially when you have a lot of HomeKit devices. It's good that Apple reversed the combining of sensors in one device, from one tile to you can break it out into multiple tiles. But in a way, that makes the problem worse because there's even more there to manage. And that's probably why they did it in the first place. But maybe the problem wasn't that things had to be combined. Maybe the problem is that those tiles are just too big, especially when you're on something like an iPhone. So I'd love to see that UI rethought. And the other thing, of course, is that there are HomeKit features that are not available in the Home app, which, as you have pointed out, with some of the shortcuts work that you've done. And it's amazing to me that that's not there. I mean, I'd love to see that come to the Home app as well. All right, Federico, great show. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas there between the two of us, and boy, I really do hope. I mean, this is kind of one of the bigger picture things we've talked about too. Is that I wish we didn't have to wait till June. I do think that it would be nice if Apple started spreading things out a little bit, especially when it comes not so much to the actual underlying OS itself, but to the system apps that are built into both iOS and the Mac, that those could be updated throughout the year. I know that's, makes June a little less showy, but then we don't have to wait for a full 12 months to get something that we didn't get in June. And while this year was a really busy year and we got lots of great things and it's taken a while to digest them, as you can tell from our discussion today, there are still a lot of things we'd like to see and things we've been thinking about ever since both Catalina and iOS 13 have come out. I want to thank our three sponsors again. That's Luna Display, Linode, and Kensington. Of course, you can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is our editor-in-chief, and he is at Viticci on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.